Commander Jake Morrison pressed his hands against the cold metal railing of the bridge and stared at the main screen. The alien ship hung in space like a black wound against the stars. It had appeared 3 hours ago without warning, dropping out of faster-than-light travel so close to their position that the proximity alarms had screamed for 10 full minutes. The ship was huge. Jake had served in the Earth fleet for 15 years and had seen every class of human vessel ever built. But this thing made even their largest battleships look like toys. Its hull was black as deep space, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. Strange curves and angles covered its surface, following no design pattern that human engineers would recognize. Energy readings from the sensor stations showed weapon systems that registered off the scale. Lieutenant Amy Carter sat at the communication station, her fingers dancing across the control panel as she tried to make sense of the signals coming from the alien vessel. The ship's computer had been running translation protocols for the past hour, comparing the incoming transmissions against every known alien language in their database. So far, nothing matched. Jake walked over to her station and leaned down to look at her screen. Waves of complex sound patterns scrolled past, rising and falling in rhythms that hurt to listen to. The harmonic structure was unlike anything they had encountered in 10 years of deep space exploration. "Any luck with the translation matrix?" Jake asked. Amy shook her head, pushing a strand of brown hair away from her face. "The computer can identify that it's definitely a language, but the structure is completely foreign. The tonal variations are incredibly complex. It's like they're speaking in music rather than words." From across the bridge, Captain Elena Rodriguez called out from her command chair. "Morrison, what's our tactical situation?" Jake moved to the tactical display and studied the readouts. "Not good, Captain. Their ship mass is approximately 50 times our displacement. Energy signatures suggest they have weapons that could vaporize us before we could even charge our defensive systems. If they wanted us dead, we would be dead already." Elena stood up and walked to the center of the bridge. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had commanded starships through 3 different first contact scenarios. None of those previous encounters had prepared her for this. "What do we know about this species?" she asked. Dr. Lisa Wang looked up from her xenobiology station where she had been reviewing files. "Based on the ship configuration and energy patterns, I believe these are the HFY. We've heard stories about them from the Centauri traders, but I thought they were just rumors." The bridge fell quiet. Everyone had heard the stories. The HFY were supposed to be the most dangerous predators in known space. Wherever they went, entire civilizations either surrendered immediately or simply vanished. No one had ever successfully negotiated with them as equals. "What kind of stories?" Jake asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Lisa pulled up a file on her screen. "According to Centauri records, the HFY Society is built around something they call the Great Hunt. They see the universe as divided into 2 types of beings, hunters and prey. They respect only strength and view any sign of weakness as an invitation to attack." Amy suddenly straightened at her station. "Captain, I'm getting something. The translation matrix just found a partial match." "Put it on speakers," Elena ordered. The bridge filled with a sound that was part growl, part musical tone, and part something that made everyone's skin crawl. Then the ship's computer began translating, its mechanical voice somehow making the words even more disturbing. "We are the HFY. We hunt among the stars. We have observed your species for 7 of your rotations around your star. We know of your wars. We know of your weapons. We know how you kill your own kind." Elena stepped forward toward the main screen. "This is Captain Elena Rodriguez of the Earth vessel Pioneer's Edge. We come in peace, seeking diplomatic contact with your people." The response came immediately, without the usual delays of interstellar communication. "Peace is for prey animals. You are not prey animals. We have studied your species. You have fought 12 major wars in the past 100 years of your timeline. You have created weapons capable of destroying your entire world. You kill not just for food or territory, but for ideas that exist only in your minds." Jake felt his blood turn cold. The aliens had been watching Earth. They knew about human history, about the wars, about the nuclear weapons. But instead of being horrified by humanity's capacity for violence, they seemed almost approving. The alien voice continued. You hunt your own kind with skill that approaches art. You fight not just for survival, but for concepts your language calls freedom and justice. This behavior is familiar to us. We recognize the scent of fellow hunters. Elena exchanged glances with Jake. This was not going the way any first contact protocol had predicted. What do you want from us? We wish to determine if your species deserves recognition as hunters rather than prey. There will be a test. If you pass, you will be granted the rights of predator species in our territory. If you fail, your world will be added to our hunting preserves. The communication ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in total silence. Everyone stared at the main screen, where the massive alien ship continued to hang motionless against the stars. Elena turned to face her crew. Well, that's not exactly how the diplomatic manual said first contact was supposed to go. Jake looked at the tactical display again. The alien ship showed no signs of powering weapons or preparing to attack. It was simply waiting, like a predator, that had cornered its prey and was now deciding what to do with it. Captain, Amy said, her voice barely above a whisper. What did they mean by hunting preserves? Lisa Wang was already pulling up files on her computer. If the stories are true, the HFY capture representatives from species they consider promising and place them on special worlds where they can observe their behavior under stress. It's like a zoo, except the exhibits are expected to hunt each other for the entertainment of their captors. Jake walked back to the railing and gripped it hard enough to make his knuckles white. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he had always known that humanity's first contact with a truly dangerous alien species would not go well. Humans had a talent for making enemies, even among their own kind. But he had never imagined anything like this. The worst part was that the aliens were not entirely wrong. Humanity did have a long history of violence. They had fought wars over resources, territory, ideology, and sometimes just because they could not agree on the proper way to worship their gods. They had indeed created weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, and had come close to using them more than once. But there was something the aliens did not understand about human violence. Humans did not fight just because they were predators. They fought because they believed in things that were worth fighting for. They fought to protect people who could not protect themselves. They fought because sometimes violence was the only way to stop greater violence. Jake wondered if that distinction would matter to creatures who saw the universe as nothing more than an endless hunt between predators and prey. He had a feeling they were about to find out. The meeting took place on Mining Station Alpha 7, a cramped facility built into a large asteroid 3 days' journey from where the first contact had occurred. The station normally housed 50 miners who extracted rare metals from the asteroid belt, but it had been hastily converted into a diplomatic venue when the HFY agreed to face-to-face negotiations. Dr. Lisa Wang had not slept in 48 hours. She sat in the station's small library, surrounded by every piece of information about the HFY that human intelligence had managed to gather over the years. Most of it came from traders who had heard stories from other traders, creating a chain of rumors that might or might not reflect reality. What she found in the files made her stomach turn. The HFY were not just predators by accident of evolution. They had built their entire civilization around the concept of the hunt. Their social structure was based on who could kill whom most efficiently. Their art celebrated successful hunts. Their religion taught that the universe was divided into hunters and prey, with no middle ground between the two. Even their concept of diplomacy involved establishing dominance through demonstrations of superior killing ability. When the HFY met other species for the first time, they did not exchange gifts or cultural artifacts. They exchanged detailed descriptions of their most effective weapons and their most impressive victories in battle. Captain Elena Rodriguez entered the library and sat down across from Lisa. Elena looked tired but determined. She had spent the past 2 days reviewing every first contact protocol in the Earth Fleet manual, trying to find some precedent for their current situation. There was none. "What do you think they really want from us?" Elena asked. Lisa closed the file she'd been reading and rubbed her eyes. "I think they want to find out if we're like them. The Kethvar divide all intelligent life into two categories. Either you're a predator species that deserves respect, or you're a prey species that exists to be hunted. There's no third option, in their worldview. And they think we might be predators? They're certainly interested in our capacity for violence. Human military history seems to have impressed them, which is disturbing when you consider what it takes to impress a species that considers warfare to be high art." Engineer Pete Collins was monitoring the conversation from the station's control room. Pete had volunteered to oversee the technical aspects of the meeting, which meant he was responsible for making sure the station's life support systems could handle alien visitors and that the translation equipment worked properly. Pete had also taken it upon himself to research Kethvar technology based on the sensor readings from their ship. What he found worried him more than he cared to admit. The aliens possessed weapons technology that was at least 200 years ahead of anything humanity had developed. Their ship's power core generated more energy than most human space stations. If they decided that humanity was a prey species, there would be nothing anyone could do to stop them. The Kethvar shuttle arrived exactly on schedule. It was smaller than their main ship but still larger than most human vessels. Like the mothership, it was black as space and covered with curves and angles that seemed to shift when you looked at them directly. The shuttle docked with the mining station through an airlock that had been hastily modified to accommodate alien technology. Captain Rodriguez, Dr. Wang, and a small diplomatic team waited in the station's main meeting room, which had been cleared of mining equipment and furnished with a table and chairs that could hopefully accommodate alien physiology. The first thing everyone noticed when the Kethvar delegation entered was their size. The lead alien, who had identified himself as War Speaker Thekmor, stood nearly 8 feet tall. His body was covered in chitinous plates that looked like natural armor, dark blue-green in color with edges that seemed sharp enough to cut. His limbs were long and powerful, ending in hands that had too many fingers and claws instead of fingernails. But it was the way he moved that made everyone in the room understand why the Kethvar were feared throughout the galaxy. Thekmor moved with the fluid grace of a born killer, every step calculated for maximum efficiency. His multiple eyes tracked the movement of every human in the room with the focused intensity of a predator sizing up potential prey. 2 other Kethvar accompanied him, slightly smaller but no less intimidating. They positioned themselves at the edges of the room where they could observe everything while remaining ready to move instantly if needed. Elena stepped forward and began the formal greeting that had been prepared by the diplomatic corps. "War Speaker, Thekmor, welcome to Mining Station Alpha 7. I am Captain Elena Rodriguez, representing the United Earth Government. We are honored by your presence and hope that this meeting will be the beginning of peaceful relations between our peoples." Thekmor's response came through the translation device in a voice that sounded like grinding metal mixed with distant thunder. "Captain Rodriguez, we do not seek peace. Peace is a concept for prey animals who huddle together for protection from hunters. We seek to determine whether your species deserves recognition." "Recognition as what?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "As fellow predators, we have studied your species for several years. Your history is rich with conflict. You have fought wars that consumed entire continents. You have developed weapons capable of sterilizing your homeworld. You have turned the act of killing your own kind into sophisticated art forms." Dr. Wang felt her blood run cold as she listened to the translation. The alien was describing human military history like it was something to be admired rather than regretted. Thekmor continued, "Most impressive is that you do not fight only for survival or territory, as most predator species do. You fight for abstract concepts that exist only in your minds. Your translator renders these concepts as freedom, justice, honor, and duty. This behavior is familiar to us. It suggests that your species has evolved beyond simple predation into something more sophisticated." Elena tried to maintain her diplomatic composure. "We prefer to think of ourselves as a peaceful species that fights only when necessary to protect ourselves and others." "Protection of others," Thekmor repeated. and something in his tone suggested genuine interest. This is curious behavior. Most predator species protect only their immediate kin. You appear to extend protection to strangers, even members of other species. Why do you do this? Elena looked at Dr. Wang, who nodded encouragingly. Because we believe that intelligent life has value regardless of which species it belongs to. We fight to protect others because we think it's the right thing to do. The war speaker was quiet for a long moment, consulting with his companions in their musical language that the translators could not fully decode. When he spoke again, his words carried a weight that made everyone in the room understand that something important was being decided. Your species presents us with a puzzle, Captain Rodriguez. You demonstrate clear predatory capabilities, yet you claim to value the lives of potential prey. This contradiction requires investigation. We propose a recognition trial to determine your true nature. What kind of trial? You will send representatives to one of our testing worlds. There they will demonstrate whether humans are truly predators or simply prey animals that have learned to use tools. The trial will determine how our species interact in the future. Elena felt the weight of her entire species' future settling on her shoulders. And if we refuse? Thekmore's multiple eyes focused on her with laser intensity. Refusal would answer our question definitively. Prey animals refuse challenges from predators. Predators accept them. Pete Collins, monitoring from the control room, realized that humanity had just been backed into a corner by beings who viewed the universe as nothing more than an eternal hunt between killers and victims. The worst part was that they might be right about human nature, and that terrified him more than the aliens themselves. The planet Kepler 442b looked beautiful from orbit, with blue oceans and green continents that reminded everyone of Earth. But the briefing materials made it clear that this world was nothing like home. The Kethvar had been using it as a hunting preserve for over 50 years, stocking it with captured members of various species, and observing how they adapted to the challenge of survival. Marine Colonel Rick Barnes stood in the transport ship's briefing room, looking at the 12 volunteers who had agreed to represent humanity in the recognition trial. Each person had been chosen for specific skills that might prove useful in an unknown survival situation. They were soldiers, scientists, engineers, and medics, all of them knowing they might not return home. Corporal Katie Murphy checked her equipment for the third time that morning. Her grandmother had fought in the European conflicts of the 2040s and had taught Katie that preparation was the difference between life and death in combat. Katie's specialty was reconnaissance and communications, skills that might prove vital in understanding the terrain and coordinating with the team. Sergeant Dan Phillips sat quietly in the corner, cleaning his rifle with practiced movements. Dan had served in Special Forces for 8 years before volunteering for deep space exploration. He had seen combat in 3 different theaters and knew how to kill efficiently when necessary. But he also knew how to avoid killing when other options existed, a skill that might prove equally important. The rules of the recognition trial were simple but brutal. The human team would be dropped into a vast wilderness preserve along with representatives from 6 other species that the Kethvar considered potentially worthy of recognition. They would have 7 days to demonstrate their hunting prowess while being observed by hidden Kethvar monitors. The catch was that the other species had been living on the preserve for years, some for decades. They knew the terrain, the dangers, and the resources. The humans would be starting from nothing, with only basic equipment and whatever skills they could bring to bear. Dr. Angela Foster, the team's xenobiologist, had spent weeks studying what little information was available about the other species on the preserve. The files made for disturbing reading. Each group had originally been peaceful or semi-peaceful when first captured by the Kethvar. Years of survival pressure had transformed them into something very different. The Zalari had once been traders, traveling between star systems in small merchant vessels. On the preserve, they had learned to set ambushes with mechanical precision, using their natural ability to blend with their surroundings to hunt other species for food and resources. The Austin had been herbivorous herd animals from a world with low gravity and abundant plant life. The preserve had forced them to become pack hunters, using their speed and coordination to bring down prey much larger than themselves. Their original gentle nature had been completely overwhelmed by the need to survive. Each species had been changed by the crucible of the preserve, turned into killers by the simple necessity of staying alive in a world where only the strongest survived. The question was what the preserve would do to humans. The transport ship entered the planet's atmosphere just after dawn, local time. Through the windows, the team could see endless forests broken by rivers, mountains, and grasslands. It looked peaceful and inviting, which made it more dangerous than any obviously hostile environment would have been. Colonel Barnes gathered the team for final instructions as they prepared to drop. Remember, we're not just trying to survive. We're trying to prove to the most dangerous predators in the galaxy that humanity deserves their respect. That means we need to demonstrate hunting ability, tactical thinking, and the will to do whatever it takes to win. "What about the other species down there?" asked Private Joey Martinez, the team's youngest member. "Are we supposed to hunt them?" Barnes considered the question carefully. The Kethvar observers would be looking for evidence of predatory behavior, but they would also be evaluating how humans approach the concept of hunting. "We do what we have to do to survive and complete the mission, but we make those decisions when we need to make them, not before." The drop zone was a clearing in dense forest, 50 miles from the nearest known settlement of other species. The team landed with nothing but personal weapons, basic survival gear, and 7 days' worth of emergency rations. Everything else they would need to find, make, or take from others. The first thing that struck everyone was how quiet the forest was. On Earth, wilderness areas were full of animal sounds. Here, the silence was almost complete, broken only by the wind in the trees and the distant sound of running water. It was the kind of silence that suggested the presence of dangerous predators that had learned to hunt without making noise. Corporal Murphy immediately began setting up a communication perimeter, while Sergeant Phillips scouted the immediate area for threats and resources. Within an hour, they had established a basic defensive position and identified the direction of the nearest water source. Dr. Foster examined plant samples and tried to determine which ones might be edible and which ones might be poisonous. The preserve had been stocked with flora and fauna from dozens of different worlds, creating an ecosystem that followed no natural rules. Plants that looked harmless might be deadly, while others that appeared dangerous might be perfectly safe. Ennui. The second day, they encountered their first sign of the other species. A group of structures had been built near a river bend, clearly the work of intelligent beings, but following no architectural pattern that human engineers would recognize. The buildings were empty, but recent signs of habitation suggested that whoever lived there had left in a hurry. Private Martinez found tracks leading away from the settlement, heading deeper into the forest. The footprints were strange, showing 3 toes instead of 5 and claws instead of normal feet. Dr. Foster identified them as probably belonging to the Zalari, based on the physical descriptions in her files. "They're watching us," Phillips reported after completing a reconnaissance circuit around the abandoned settlement. "I found observation posts in the trees recently used. Whoever was living here cleared out when they detected our approach, but they're still in the area." Colonel Barnes made a decision that would define how the rest of the trial proceeded. Instead of occupying the abandoned settlement or trying to track down the Zalari, he ordered the team to continue deeper into the preserve. They would find their own territory and establish their own base of operations. The decision puzzled some team members, who thought that taking over an existing settlement would demonstrate the kind of aggressive behavior the Kethvar were looking for. But Barnes had a different understanding of what the trial was really testing. The Kethvar were not just looking for evidence that humans could fight and kill. They were trying to determine what kind of predators humans were. Every species on the preserve had been forced to abandon their original nature and adopt pure survival strategies. The question was whether humans would do the same, or whether they would find a different way to survive. On the third day, they encountered the Osthan, a pack of 6 creatures, roughly human-sized but moving on 4 legs with the fluid coordination of natural hunters, emerged from the forest and began circling the human camp. They made no aggressive moves, but their intent was clear. They were evaluating the humans as potential prey or competitors. Dr. Foster observed their behavior through binoculars and realized something that changed her understanding of the entire situation. The Austen were not acting like the herbivorous herd animals described in the files. They were acting like pack hunters who had learned their tactics through years of practice. But there was something else in their behavior, something that suggested intelligence and planning beyond simple predatory instinct. "Colonel," she whispered, "I don't think these creatures are just hunting us. I think they're trying to figure out what we are, just like we're trying to figure out what they are." Barnes lowered his weapon and made a decision that would have consequences none of them could predict. Instead of preparing for combat, he ordered the team to demonstrate non-threatening behavior while remaining ready to defend themselves if necessary. The standoff lasted for 2 hours. Then slowly, the Austen pack withdrew into the forest, leaving, behind what appeared to be a gift, the carcass of a small animal freshly killed and still warm. Private Martinez stared at the offering in confusion. "Why would they give us food?" Dr. Foster examined the carcass and found that it had been killed cleanly and efficiently, with no signs of the kind of savage feeding that purely predatory animals would display. "I think," she said slowly, "that they're not as different from their original nature as the files suggested. They've learned to hunt, but they haven't forgotten how to cooperate." By the 5th day on the preserve, Colonel Barnes and his team had done something that no other species in the preserve's 50-year history had accomplished. Instead of competing with the other groups for territory and resources, they had begun building alliances. It started with the Austen pack that had left them the gift of food. Dr. Foster had spent hours observing their behavior and had reached a conclusion that challenged everything the HFY files claimed about how species adapted to the preserve. The Austen had not completely abandoned their original cooperative nature. They had simply learned to apply it in new ways. Corporal Katie Murphy had made the breakthrough in communication. Using hand signals and simple drawings in the dirt, she had managed to establish basic contact with one of the younger Austen who seemed more curious than afraid. The creature's name, as near as the translation device could render it, was something like Swift Runner. Through Swift Runner, the humans learned that the preserve was far more complex than anyone had realized. The different species did not just hunt each other randomly. They had developed territories, trade relationships, and even primitive treaties that governed how conflicts were resolved. The HFY observers saw only the hunting and fighting, but they missed the underlying structure that kept the preserve from descending into total chaos. The Zalari settlement they had discovered on the 2nd day was part of a network of trading posts scattered throughout the preserve. The Zalari had not abandoned their merchant nature entirely. They had simply learned to trade in different goods, information about safe routes, knowledge of edible plants, and warnings about dangerous areas. Sergeant Dan Phillips had made contact with a Zalari trader named Quickeye, who operated from a hidden camp in the hills above the river valley. Quickeye was suspicious at first, but when Phillips offered to share human knowledge about water purification in exchange for information about the preserve's geography, the trader's attitude changed completely. "Your people's strange," Quickeye said through the translation device, his voice carrying the musical tones characteristic of his species. "Other new groups try to take territory, steal resources. You offer to share knowledge. Why?" Phillips considered the question carefully. The honest answer was that sharing knowledge seemed more likely to lead to long-term survival than trying to dominate through force. But he was not sure the Zalari would understand that reasoning. "Stronger together than apart," Phillips said, finally, using simple words that the translator could handle easily. Quickeye's large eyes blinked rapidly, a sign that Dr. Foster had learned indicated deep thought in his species. "HFY not think this way. They think only strong survive, weak die. You think different?" "Sometimes," Phillips said. "Sometimes fighting makes you weaker, not stronger." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of emergency signals from the human camp. Phillips grabbed his weapons and ran back through the forest with Quickeye following at a safe distance. What they found when they arrived changed everything. The camp was under attack, but not by any of the species they had encountered so far. 3 massive creatures, each the size of a small building, were systematically destroying everything in their path. They moved on multiple legs like giant insects, but their bodies were clearly artificial, made of metal and composite materials that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. Private Joey Martinez was pinned behind an overturned supply crate, firing his rifle at one of the creatures with no visible effect. The bullet simply bounced off its armored hide without leaving so much as a scratch. "Dracul!" Quick-Eye shouted, his voice high with terror. "Hunters from Sky. They come when Kethavar think preserve too peaceful." Dr. Foster, taking cover behind a large tree, realized what they were facing. The Dracul were not natural creatures. They were machines, artificial hunters that the Kethavar released into the preserve whenever they felt that the current population was becoming too comfortable. They were designed to test the absolute limits of survival, forcing the preserve's inhabitants to demonstrate their most desperate fighting abilities. Colonel Barnes tried to coordinate a defense, but the weapons the team carried were designed for fighting biological opponents, not armored machines. The Dracul moved with mechanical precision, their sensors tracking every human movement while their built-in weapon systems charged for another attack. That was when something unexpected happened. The Austin pack that had been shadowing the human camp emerged from the forest and began attacking the nearest Dracul from multiple directions. Their claws could not penetrate the machine's armor any better than human bullets could, but they seemed to know exactly where to strike to disrupt its sensors and mobility systems. Moments later, a group of Zalari appeared on the hilltop above the camp, carrying what looked like improvised explosive devices. They began throwing them at the Dracul with remarkable accuracy, each blast targeting joints and sensor clusters that the machines needed to function properly. Dr. Foster watched, in amazement, as species that had supposedly been turned into pure predators by years of survival, pressure worked together to fight a common threat. The cooperation was not perfect. There was no central command structure and several attacks were poorly coordinated. But it was happening spontaneously, without any advanced planning. "They've done this before," she shouted to Colonel Barnes, over the sound of weapons fire and exploding devices. "This isn't the first time the Kethavar have released these things. The species here have learned to work together when they have to." Barnes realized that the human team was witnessing something that the Kethavar observers had probably never seen before. The hidden cameras and monitoring devices that watched the preserve were designed to observe individual species' behavior and hunting patterns. They were not positioned to record large-scale cooperative efforts between different groups. "Murphy," Barnes shouted, "get on the radio and coordinate with the other groups. Phillips, see if you can figure out how these machines work. Foster, find their weak points." What happened next would be analyzed by xenobiologists for years afterward. The human team did not just join the fight against the Dracul, they transformed it, using military communication protocols and tactical coordination that none of the other species possessed. They turned a chaotic battle into something resembling an organized military operation. Corporal Murphy established communication links between all the different groups, using the translation devices to relay orders and coordinate attacks. Sergeant Phillips identified the machine's power sources and guidance systems, information that he immediately shared with every fighter in the area. Dr. Foster realized that the Dracul had one critical weakness. They were programmed to hunt individual targets, not to deal with coordinated group attacks. When multiple species worked together using human tactical principles, the machine's artificial intelligence became confused and less effective. The battle lasted for 6 hours and involved every species group within a 20-mile radius of the human camp. When it was over, all 3 Dracul units had been destroyed, their metal carcasses scattered across the forest floor like the remains of fallen giants. But something more important had happened during the fight. The different species had not just worked together out of necessity. They had learned to trust each other in ways that years of peaceful coexistence had never achieved. The shared danger and mutual dependence had created bonds that transcended the predator-prey relationships that the Kethavar expected to see. Private Martinez, exhausted and covered in dirt and machine oil, sat down next to one of the fallen Dracul and looked around at the mixed groups of aliens and humans who were tending to their wounded and sharing supplies. "Colonel," he said, "I don't think the Kethavar are going to like what their cameras recorded today." Colonel Barnes nodded, but he was not thinking about the Kethavar reaction. He was thinking about what the battle had revealed about the preserve and the species living on it. The recognition trial was supposed to test whether humans were predators or prey. Instead, it had demonstrated something that the Kethvar had never considered: the possibility that the most successful predators might be those who knew when cooperation was more effective than competition. 3 months after the recognition trial ended, Captain Elena Rodriguez found herself in a situation she had never expected. She was sitting in a conference room aboard a Kethvar diplomatic vessel, negotiating trade agreements and cultural exchange programs with beings who had once been preparing to hunt her entire species. The transformation had not been easy. Many Kethvar still believed that cooperation was a sign of weakness, and that true predators should rule through strength alone. But War Speaker Thekmor had convinced enough of his people that humanity represented something worth studying rather than something that needed to be conquered. Dr. Lisa Wang was working with a team of Kethvar scientists to establish the first joint research station on Kepler 442b. The preserve had been converted from a hunting ground into what everyone was calling the Interspecies Cooperation Center. Representatives from dozens of different civilizations came there to learn new approaches to diplomacy and conflict resolution. The work was challenging because it required both humans and Kethvar to question assumptions they had held for centuries. The Kethvar had to learn that strength could be used to protect rather than to dominate. Humans had to learn that their protective instincts were not weaknesses to be ashamed of, but capabilities that made them unique among the galaxy's intelligent species. Quickeye, the Zalari trader who had helped during the Dracul battle, had become the unofficial coordinator for many of the center's activities. His species' natural talent for building trading relationships proved valuable when trying to establish communication between groups that had never trusted each other before. Humans teach strange lessons, Quickeye told Dr. Wang during one of their planning sessions. Kethvar always believe strong take from weak. You show them strong can give to weak and become stronger. This hurt their brains, but they learn. The learning process was not always smooth. Several Kethvar military commanders had challenged the new policies, demanding that humanity prove its worth through traditional combat trials rather than cooperative exercises. These challenges had to be handled carefully to avoid triggering the kind of dominance conflicts that had defined Kethvar society for thousands of years. Colonel Barnes had been assigned to work with Kethvar military units to develop new training programs that incorporated human tactical principles. The sessions were tense at first, with many Kethvar warriors viewing cooperation as a form of surrender, but when they saw how human-style coordination could make even small units far more effective than individual fighters, attitudes began to change. Your people fight like they think, observed battle leader Caxthor during one training exercise. Not just with weapons, but with minds working together. This is power we do not understand, but we see it works. The real breakthrough came when a crisis developed in the Centauri system. A plague had broken out on one of the trading worlds, threatening to spread to dozens of other planets. Traditional Kethvar response would have been to quarantine the entire system and let the plague run its course, eliminating the weak and leaving only the strong survivors. Instead, War Speaker Thekmor proposed a joint human Kethvar relief mission that would attempt to stop the plague through medical intervention and resource sharing. Many of his advisors opposed the plan, arguing that it wasted resources on beings who were too weak to survive on their own. Captain Rodriguez volunteered to lead the human contingent of the relief mission, working alongside Kethvar medical specialists, who had never before attempted to save lives rather than take them. The mission required both species to contribute their strongest capabilities, human medical knowledge and organizational skills, combined with Kethvar transportation technology and resource extraction abilities. The plague response became a test case for everything that humans and Kethvar had been trying to learn about cooperation. Human doctors worked with Kethvar scientists to develop treatments that could be mass-produced using alien technology. Kethvar ships provided transportation for medical supplies, while human logistics specialists coordinated distribution to ensure that help reached the areas where it was needed most. Engineer Pete Collins, who had been monitoring the first contact from Mining Station Alpha 7, found himself managing the technical aspects of the largest interspecies relief operation in galactic history. The communication networks alone required coordination between 12 different translation protocols and 47 different technological standards. 6 months ago, the Kethvar were planning to hunt us, Pete reported to Earth Command. Now they're asking for our help in saving lives. I'm not sure anyone back home is going to believe how fast things have changed out here. The plague response was successful beyond anyone's expectations. Not only was the disease contained and treated, but the cooperation between human and Kethvar teams led to medical breakthroughs that benefited species throughout the galaxy. More importantly, it demonstrated that the galaxy's most feared predators could choose to use their capabilities to preserve life rather than destroy it. The success of the Centauri mission led to requests for similar cooperation from other regions of known space. Species that had lived in fear of Kethvar expansion began to see them as potential allies rather than inevitable conquerors. The change was gradual, but it represented a fundamental shift in how power was understood and exercised in galactic politics. Dr. Foster, working at the Research Center on Kepler 442b, documented the changes that were occurring, not just in interspecies relations, but in the species themselves. The Kethvar, who participated in cooperative missions, began to develop new cultural practices that emphasized protection and preservation alongside their traditional focus on hunting and conquest. Evolution doesn't stop with biology, she wrote in her research notes. The Kethvar are evolving culturally, learning that apex predators can choose to transcend predation itself. They're discovering that the ultimate hunt might be the pursuit of knowledge and the protection of life rather than its destruction. War Speaker Thekmore, reflecting on the changes in his own society, admitted to Captain Rodriguez that the recognition trial had taught the Kethvar more than it had taught humanity. We believed that strength was demonstrated through dominance, he said. You showed us that true strength is demonstrated through choice, the choice to protect rather than destroy, to build rather than conquer, to cooperate rather than compete. Your species has given us something we did not know we were missing, the understanding that predators can evolve beyond predation. We came to judge whether you were hunters or prey. Instead, you taught us that the greatest hunters are those who choose when to hunt and when to heal. Private Martinez, who had returned to Earth but continued to follow developments through military communications, summarized the situation in a letter to his family. We went out there thinking we had to prove we were tough enough to survive among the galaxy's deadliest killers. Turns out what we really proved was that the deadliest killers could learn to be something more than killers. The story of humanity's recognition trial became a legend that spread throughout known space, but not for the reasons anyone had expected. It was remembered not as a tale of human strength or Kethvar mercy, but as proof that even the most fundamental assumptions about survival and competition could be changed when different species chose to learn from each other rather than fear each other. Captain Rodriguez, now serving as humanity's first ambassador to predator species, often reflected on how close they had come to a very different outcome. If the humans had tried to prove themselves through pure aggression, if the Kethvar had been unwilling to question their own assumptions, the galaxy would still be divided between hunters and prey, with no possibility of cooperation between them. Instead, they had discovered that the universe was large enough for predators who chose to protect, for hunters who chose to heal, and for apex species who measured their success not by what they could destroy, but by what they could preserve and build together.